Hi, I'm Dr. Nick Begich, and we're here today with the first in a series of videos. Today's video is focused on the mind, human performance, and enhancing human performance. Throughout the day, we're going to demonstrate a number of tools and a number of technologies that are here now in the 21st century. We're going to talk about the good use of technology versus uses that are detrimental to human affairs. Enjoy the video today and enjoy the presentation. It's going to be a good one. We're going to be filled with information. And today we're in the backdrop of my home in Alaska. Thanks for being with me today. Today we're going to be talking about mind control in the 21st century. But first, let's give a little bit of background on who I am. I'm Dr. Nick Begich. I was born and raised in Alaska. I have a doctorate in traditional and complementary medicines and a background in politics here in this part of the world. I've been active on these issues and issues on technology throughout the world. I've lectured in 22 countries all over the United States. I've worked with 200 radio and TV producers around the world to get these issues into the hearts and minds of folks so that we can really debate and look at what the potential is both on the positive side of technology as well as some of the things that we all need to be concerned about and look out for. Here in Alaska, I also work as a tribal administrator for Chickaloon Village, one of the federally recognized Native American tribes in Alaska. I worked as an administrator in public education. In the last 10 years have been actively engaged primarily in activist work surrounding these issues. Most recently, I was appointed Executive Director of the Lay Foundation on Technologies based in Dallas, Texas, to take technology issues forward, to educate the public so that we can all be more informed as we move forward into this century. First, let me give a little bit of background on this whole area. You know, the military's interest in this area goes back to the Korean conflict. Right after the Korean War, returning veterans, prisoners of war, had really unusual behavioral changes. In fact, as our military began to look at these guys and find out what was going on with them, we found out that huge psychological transformations were made. These were made through lots of different methods, mainly affecting the emotions of folks. What happened as a result of this is our military and others became very interested in the idea of manipulating human behavior for lots of different purposes. I mean, obviously, in prisoners of war situations, the idea of interrogating folks where they're more liable and susceptible to giving the information up was the main emphasis during the Korean conflict, and of course was of interest to our military as well. From the 1950s, things changed pretty dramatically. As we rolled into the 1960s, a lot of interest into the idea of electronically controlling what happens within the human brain was being pursued. In fact, in the early part of the Vietnam War, back in the mid-60s, a device called the LIDA machine, L-I-D-A, was captured from the Russians. It was used in interrogating U.S. prisoners in Vietnam. And essentially what it was an oscillating strobe light mixed with auditory signals that actually caused what's called brain entrainment, the idea of the brain beginning to mirror or follow those external signals. And what this did is put people in a highly suggestive state and a state where they were more willing to give up intelligence. This particular device triggered a whole cascade of interest, primarily from Central Intelligence Agency. In fact, it was right after this period of time in the early 70s that this whole adventure became of interest to our U.S. Congress. Back in 1975, the United States Congress did a full analysis of what the Central Intelligence Agency was doing in the United States. And within that analysis, they published this report. And this is a report on the activities within the United States. And if people remember, the Central Intelligence Agency was supposed to be dealing with things only off of our shores, not within our boundaries. Now, in the 60s, the CIA was used for infiltrating student groups, getting involved in surveillance of everyone from the Congress all the way through activist organizations, individuals through the United States. During this same period of time, a huge controversy broke, and it was the MK Ultra controversy. And this dealt with the idea of taking individuals, utilizing primarily chemical means, LSD and other mind-altering drugs, to see if you could alter behavior in a favorable way for military adventures. In fact, the abuses that were engaged at that time are actually spoken about in this congressional report. The sad story is that of all of the victims, thousands of military personnel used in these experiments as well as others, never once was the government fully held accountable until one individual actually committed suicide. That resulted in a lawsuit that eventually was settled by the Central Intelligence Agency in favor of that individual who was subjected to this kind of experimentation. At Laurentian University in Canada, similar work was being done, really developing methods, protocols for influencing human behavior without chemical means. If you even go back to the 60s again for a few minutes, and let's talk about another guy. This guy was Jose Delgado. Jose Delgado put together this book. This is Physical Control of the Mind Toward a Psycho-Civilized Society. Jose had his degree in electrophysiology from the University of Madrid. He was granted his degree in 1950, and once achieving that degree, he spent his time sort of mapping the brain, looking at what parts of the brain affect various parts of our behavior and activity. What he found was that the brain could be mapped, that you could actually implant electrodes within the brain and get a number of effects. And some of that he was doing with primates. He was doing it with bulls as well. In fact, this image is Jose Delgado with a charging bull coming at him. He threw a radio transmitter, threw the switch on it, and basically stopped the bull, not dead, but stopped it dead in its tracks, where it stopped the charge. This was done in 1969. Now, back in 1969, Jose Delgado had left Spain, had come to the United States, was working primarily at Yale University in this work, where he continued his work until the mid-'80s. What he found is that he was able to stimulate the brain utilizing an implanted technology and cause a number of effects in primates, bulls, and even human beings. By the 1980s, he found that he didn't need any physical contact with the human brain. He just needed to oscillate or vibrate energy into the brain in a very specific way. And what he found in 1985 was that you could create tremendous changes in human brain chemistry by oscillating energy in at 1/50th of what the Earth naturally produces in the radio frequency range. Now, if you think about that in a broader sense, how much radio frequency energy is around us right now at this moment is about 200 million times more than nature produces on its own. So take what nature produces on its own, cut it down to 1/50th of that amount of energy, and that was what was sufficient to override human brains and primates in such a way as to change them from, say, lethargic and passive to highly aggressive and agitated, almost like throwing on and off a light switch. This was documented in work at Yale University. This work has also been documented in our books, which is part of the basis of this series, the Earth Rising, The Revolution, and Earth Rising, The Betrayal of Science, Society, and the Soul. And in these two books, we actually lay out over 1,000 reference sources, laying out exactly where each bit of information comes from, primarily quoting mainstream media reports, academic studies, unclassified military records, and work done in a number of institutions around the world. On this subject, we were also pretty impressed by the idea that finally one of the leading publications in the world, The Economist, actually took this issue on in this cover story from the end of May 2002. And in this cover story, the beginning of the dialogue, the debate on the ethics of mind control, the ethics of artificially manipulating the human brain for military applications. If you take it a little bit further and we start to look at sort of what did the military do during the 60s that was the most impressive, the thing that struck me was not the chemical tests, because those are pretty obvious to everyone. It was the idea, more in line with what Delgado and others were utilizing, which was this idea of oscillating electromagnetic fields of various kinds. The radio frequency energy was as being one of those primary movers. As we looked into the history of the technology, what we were able to find is over 3 dozen U.S. patents tracing the evolution from the early 1960s primarily up until the beginning of this century. And many of those you'll find available on the DVD as reference material that goes with this presentation, because we want people to have those hard documents and access to that information directly. The other thing that I would say in terms of military applications, it became pretty interesting as we started to see the evolution of the technology, and we started to see writers like Zbigniew Brzezinski, when he was at Columbia University, take this issue on. If you go back to this book, Between Two Ages, this was written by Brzezinski before he became National Security Advisor to Jimmy Carter when he was President of the United States. And within the context of this book, startling things start to emerge in terms of the technology and where it's going. One in particular that was an interesting idea, the one fielded by a researcher named Gordon J.F. MacDonald, and I'll just read this short quote. He was a geophysicist specializing in problems of warfare, and this is what he thought was possible. J.F. Gordon MacDonald, a geophysicist specializing in problems of war, has written that accurately timed, artificially excited electronic strokes could lead to a pattern of oscillations that produce relatively high power levels over certain regions of the Earth. In this way, one could develop a system that would seriously impair brain performance of very large populations in selected regions over an extended period, no matter how deeply disturbing the thought of using the environment to manipulate behavior for national advantages. To some, the technology permitting such use will very probably develop within the next few decades. This was written in 1973, and in those last few decades, that is exactly the technology that has emerged and the technology we'll be discussing today. Some of the other areas that became pretty interesting, and it wasn't just to us, but others were looking at this whole idea of weapons advancements and technology as it could affect human behavior on a large scale, covering the entire planet, and then something much more narrower. The things that Brzezinski was talking about was this idea of being able to oscillate energy in such a way that you could create a signal that would return to the Earth in such a way as to alter behavior. How does that work? Let's talk a little bit about the mechanisms behind brain entrainment and what exactly that means. Affecting human behavior, affecting the brain, can be done in a number of different ways. Firstly, you need to look at sort of what are the predominant brainwave activity within the brain and how does that line up against what we generally know. Let's break it down into four areas. We're going to talk about alpha waves, beta waves, theta waves, and delta waves. And we're going to start with the deepest states of human consciousness. When you're totally knocked out, deep sleep, you're in this deep delta state, which is approximately 1 to 4 hertz or vibrations per second or pulses per second. If you looked at an EEG to look at that brain activity, you'd see this sort of pulsing energy within this range of 1 to 4 hertz. The next level up is called theta. Theta runs between approximately 4 and 7 hertz, or pulses per second, or vibrations per second. This is the place that most people are when you're sort of in between awake and asleep, where you're consciously dreaming but you're still unconscious, but you have that sort of in-between state. That's the theta state. This is where most 3 to 5-year-olds spend most of their time. If you were to look at an EEG of their brains, this is where the predominant activity is, which gives a clear explanation of why sometimes it's difficult for young children to separate the imaginary world from the real world. It's because of where they generally live. But in this same place of where their brains are, where they absorb tremendous amounts of information. You think of 3 to 5-year-olds in terms of language skills, social behavior, the kinds of things they're learning. The other thing that happens is we shove kids into an early frame of learning, where the brains aren't fully developed for the kind of academic studies that many of us push our kids into maybe a little bit too prematurely. As an example, in Europe, they don't even start children in school till usually 7 years old versus the 5 and 4-year-olds being started in school in the United States and in preschool programs. Now the next stage is the alpha stage. This runs approximately 7 to 12 hertz. This is where you are when you're in the zone, when you're focused, when you're as an artist or an athlete, where you're just at your optimum performance. For accelerated learning, for certain particular types of learning, this is extremely useful brain range to be in. It's where you want to be for intellectual work and creative work. The next level is beta. This is where you're actively engaged, thinking and learning. At the same time, there's a little bit more emotional content in terms of the dialogue. As you get to high beta, you get into those agitated states, or states where we're not in as good a control of ourselves as we like to be. So the range, if you're looking at children that function, say, at too high a beta, these are folks that are attention deficit disordered, often cataloged in that way. Also, if they're running theta, they're running too low of a frequency range. Oftentimes we categorize children as learning disabled. And yet, really what may be happening in many instances when we diagnose too early is the brain just hasn't fully developed to where the alpha rhythms and the beta rhythms tend to dominate the waking state, which is where we want to be as adults. The interesting thing in terms of study is what was discovered early on, originally by Delgado and others, was the idea that external fields, when they were coherent or rhythmic and followed very specific patterns, could override the activity of the normal brain. And this could be done with pulsating radio frequency signals, pulsating electromagnetic fields, with oscillating light or pulsating light, and it could also be done with sound. Now, if you think about sound waves and sound itself, for the human ear to perceive it, we don't perceive the very, very low frequency sounds. Animals like elephants can perceive those low frequency sounds. Other animals that have large receivers, ears that pick up those low frequency sounds can do that, but we can't. So what happens is the brain, not being able to hear below a certain range, cannot pick up these low rhythms that can cause brain entrainment unless you can create sort of a cancellation effect. And here's what's been developed. A gentleman named Robert Monroe, back in the late 1950s, early 1960s, discovered that if you sent sound into one ear at, say, 16,000 cycles per second or vibrations per second, within the range of human hearing, and one in at, say, 16,007 in the other ear. So you have 16,000 coming in here, 16,007 coming in here, and they cancel within the brain and leave a beat frequency of 7 hertz. Within the alpha range, as an example, the brain locks onto that beat frequency, and this is called binaural beat. It was actually patented by Monroe. It was used to develop a number of technologies, but the real effect of binaural beat is pretty profound. If you look at this image, and this is an image taken from the Monroe Institute, you can see a normal brain on this side, which the energy is distributed across the brain, with one side, in this case, dominating, where the energy is focused in the reds and the yellows on one side of the brain. With binaural beats, you create what's called whole brain entrainment, where both hemispheres of the brain, both the creative side and the analytical side, harmonize and work together. This is the ideal state of learning, the ideal state for absorbing information, taking it into consciousness and committing it to long-term memory, and also having profound effects, very strong effects, suggestive effects on the human brain and subsequent behaviors. As a result, over 60,000 people were tested at the Monroe Institute utilizing this technology, and actual tapes and CDs were developed for creating very specific behavioral effects for enhancing human performance, not for necessarily military applications, but for civilian applications in a number of areas. And we'll talk about that as we go on through this presentation today. The main interest, again, of many was the idea of being able to enhance performance. I mean, consider the fact that brain activity in young children, how do we moderate that now? I mean, when kids are hyperactive, we drug them. When they're attention deficit disordered for other reasons, we drug them. And the idea there is to get them to slow down enough in order to make the kinds of intellectual processes work so that things do work properly. Now, there's other ways to accomplish this, and one of the most outstanding programs in the country was actually initiated in a charter school in the Minneapolis School District. Minneapolis School District set up a charter school where they only allowed children in, essentially, who were attention deficit disordered. 80% of the children were on Ritalin, a drug used, again, to modify their behavior so they can learn. What they found is, using a technique called brain biofeedback or neurobiofeedback, that they were able to modify these children's brain activities in this way. Essentially, it was a computer screen that would have like a visual image that a young child could relate to, more like a game than anything else. So you get a bouncing ball, for instance, the kid would be wired up. He'd have a 16 or 8 channel EEG plugged onto his head. So he'd have all these points covered on the head. Now they make really cool little helmets. They look like a bicycle helmet, so kids will tolerate them without all the electrodes stuck to them. But it's a nice little arrangement where they look at the screen, and as their brain hits the right range for that ideal state of learning, the ball will bounce. And the higher it bounces, the more into that zone the child's brain activity is. And what they have found is that with 30 to 40 one-hour sessions with each child, they're able to actually train the child so that they can literally go into that ideal state of learning at will. In other words, they don't need the biofeedback apparatus. It's like a training tool. It's the same as if you try and learn how to ride a bicycle out of a textbook. It's not going to work very good when you get on it the first time. But if you get on that bicycle and you fall down 2 or 3 times and you learn how to ride it at 5 or 6 years old and you never picked up a bicycle again until you were in your 20s and you grabbed that bicycle, you would immediately have laid down those necessary learning tracks to pick it up because of that feedback you get from the experience of actually all of your sensory perceptions being engaged in the learning activity. When you look at brain biofeedback, it's essentially the same kind of focused learning that allows you to retain, lay down those tracks so that you can go there at will. What did Minneapolis School District find out? After the first year, 80% of the student body was off of Ritalin, off of all psychoactive drugs. We're able to move gradually back into regular education programs, not needing the special education resources that otherwise would be demanded throughout their 12 years of K through 12 education. Now, why is that important? Obviously, for the individual, I think it's obvious. But as taxpayers and people concerned about what goes on in our communities, special education is one of the biggest growing costs around the country. It's something that other school districts should be actively engaged in, and it's something that you, as a listener to this DVD, could become an activist of one. Contact the Minneapolis School District, get information on this program, and get it into your local school district. You'll help a lot of kids, and you'll reduce costs in your communities, and actually begin to see technology applied in an educational environment. Now, since Minneapolis had started this program, a number of school districts around the country are starting to duplicate that program and bring it into the mainstream. But you know, it's taken 20 years from the discovery of the technology to actually getting it in to an educational environment where it might be useful. And if you ask people involved in children's issues, this is probably one of the most important issues facing children in public education around the country today. When you look back on Monroe's work, you know, Monroe was doing some interesting things. He was trying to stimulate the brain not just for learning applications, but also layering the information. You would actually see a brainwave was actually put on the material in such a way that the brain actually would lock onto that external signal. Now, the other thing that Monroe and others discovered is that you could combine binaural beat with flickering light. And let me give you an example. Most people think of the television set as a light radiator as pretty harmless. You know, you get back 10, 15 feet, as most of us do, and you watch a television set, and it's pretty safe. Everyone says, you know, it's what's called non-ionizing radiation that doesn't generate a lot of heat. You're so far from it, and the way energy spreads out, as it spreads out and you get further away, the density or concentration of energy decreases dramatically. This explains why on a television set, when you come up real close and you put your hand on that screen, you can feel that energy radiating, but as you back off, it gets less and less dense pretty rapidly, within just a few inches. If you think about radio frequency energy being broadcast from a radio transmitter, you know, when it starts out and you're close to the transmitter, you hear the signal real clearly, and the further and further and further you get away, the less dense that signal is and the weaker the signal becomes. When you think about energy oscillators and light in particular, think back a number of years ago. In fact, now it would have been in the late 1990s, there was an incident in Japan where actually children, 700 children watching a television cartoon, actually went to the hospital with epileptic seizures. What caused those epileptic seizures when light is supposed to be harmless, particularly that coming off of television? It was the flicker rate. That's what was determined. The rate in which a certain segment flickered or pulsed, it struck what's called a window frequency. Within the range, there are certain frequencies like dialing up a radio. In between you get static, no signal, no clear resonance between transmitter and receiver. Yet when you hit the station, you get a nice clear signal. The same is true within our physiology, within our brains and within our bodies. Most energy is static between the stations. But when you hit that window frequency, you can trigger this cascading chemical reactions within the human brain. In that case, it took 700 children to the hospital with energy otherwise thought to be harmless. Capitalizing on this knowledge, people have developed technology that focuses in on those window frequencies for enhanced human performance, whether it's to help you sleep, to cause you to slow down, relax, and go into those deeper states of sleep, or whether it's to perk you up, to gain energy so that you can move forward in a day with a lot more vigor and a lot more energy, or whether it's for those accelerating learning applications where in the background you could be either playing binaural beat or you could be utilizing this technology to feed information in, putting the brain into that ideal state for learning, and then bringing the information in a way that the brain can absorb it readily, retain it, and actually be able to use that information in a much more effective way in the future. The other place is just general meditation, where people want to get into those deep states of meditation where they open their consciousness to their more creative capacities. And these are essentially the ways in which these technologies have evolved. And they've evolved in a number of different directions. Light and sound devices, and we're going to demonstrate some of that a little bit later. Electrocranial stimulation, using electromagnetic fields to stimulate the brain. And we'll demonstrate what that looks like a little bit later. And also the concept of biofeedback, being able to get a signal in and being able to understand that signal in a way that causes us to slow down or to be able to learn how to relax. Stress is probably the single biggest killer in the world today. If you really look at stress-related illness, whether they're psychologically based or physically based, stress is the root of many of the illnesses we see today. And as our societies become more complex, the tools for relaxation become extremely important. So we're going to get into a little bit of that as we go through the day. The other area that gets interesting is this whole idea of electromagnetic fields affecting our body. And you know, this is a source of a lot of controversy and a lot of serious science. You know, behind me are a number of books and publications on bioelectromagnetism, electromagnetic fields, power line cover-up, cell phones, lots of information that has been published. Some in the mainstream science community and other in just the mainstream media reporting on the findings. And what is being reported today is pretty exciting stuff. The opportunities to enhance what we are as human beings, to become more complete. I mean, if you think about right brain, left brain arguments, you know, that went on in the, I remember mainly from the 80s where everyone was saying, you know, women are more creative, so they have one portion of the brain that dominates, whereas men are more analytical, so another portion of the brain that dominates. And if you really look at these EEGs and brain activity within human beings, you will see exactly that. But does that mean that one side or the other side should be more dominant? It's really a function of our education system. If you look at young children, you see a more balanced hemispheric balance between both sides of the brain, the creative and the analytical. As we go through formal education, we tend to drift one way or the other and become channel locked into what parts of the brains dominate. Ideally, both sides work together, the analytical and the creative, and the idea of enhancing performance on both hemispheres is the objective of the science of controlling the mind for your own advancement. Understanding a little bit more about the body and energy interactions with the body, you know, the chemical model was the dominant model of the last century. This was the idea that everything that happens within our physical health and within our mind is related to chemical interactions. What was really a big controversy towards the end of the last century and not so much in the beginning of this one is the idea that energetically what happens to us has profound effects on our health and our psyche. If you think about the body, not so much from the chemical compounds to body cells, to body components, to body, but go a little bit deeper. Think about the body first energetically. Energy, atoms, molecules, collections of atoms, chemicals, body parts, and then body. Starting at the very lowest level, energy can have a profound effect in terms of how our bodies work. And sort of the dividing line between the sciences. You know, often the folks that had really strong math skills and capabilities in mathematics went into physics and quantum physics. Those that had lesser math skills but had good science minds tended to go more towards the chemistry and the physiology and the health fields, other areas. And that break point really segregated the knowledge in a way that was not a good idea in terms of the West, because we lost the understanding of what was happening behind those chemical reactions and how you might be able to manipulate chemical reactions, not with other chemicals, but just using energy itself. Now, the military actually commissioned a study back in the mid-'80s. It was done through the University of Utah, and it resulted in the Radio Frequency Dosimetry Handbook, published in 1985. Now, this handbook was actually put together to just look at radio frequency energy and its effect on our health and on our mind. And what they were able to find is that every major organ of the body, including the brain, the heart, the liver, the lungs, could all be interfered with or overridden by external signals in the radio frequency range within a very narrow bandwidth. In other words, again, looking at the analogy of the radio station and dialing through the stations, when you have resonance, a correspondence, a harmony between the transmitter and the receiver, that's where the energy exchange happens, that's where the action is. For a radio station, it means a nice clean sound. In the case of the human body, it means the efficient operation of an organ or the interference with its efficient operation for military advantage. Now, some people will remember seeing some of the devices that were announced at the very end of the last decade. One of them for riot control purposes, and it was a microwave transmitter mounted on the Humvee, and it was used for creating the sensation of heat energy on the surface of the skin. You know, and when you think about creating heat energy, what was it doing? It made you feel like you had 130 to 140 degrees temperature, very irritating. You know, in fact, burning, the last time it was used to modify human behavior was back in the Middle Ages, and we kind of gave that idea up as inhumane. But we brought it back. Now, what they didn't tell us about that particular device is that same radio frequency energy, if you oscillate or you change the oscillation or the frequency, if you change the waveform and power densities or any of a number of parameters, you can create much different effects. The Radio Frequency Dosimetry Handbook, commissioned by the United States Air Force, explains what those varying effects are, whether it's interfering with the heart, the lungs, the liver, the kidneys, or in fact just controlling behavior by agitating people in terms of creating the heat sensation. But the idea of the military moving into this realm has become really moved from the area of science fiction to science fact. In fact, after 9/11, some other interesting ideas started being fielded. One of them was utilizing the knowledge of the brain to really look at, in the same way you walk through a metal detector to find out whether you're carrying the gun. The idea was being put forward by a group of electrical engineers that what we could do is capture the signal intelligence. In other words, the brain activity of those passing through a receiver, so that we could actually look at people that were experiencing high degrees of agitation or fear, the kinds of emotions that might make someone more of an interest before they board a plane. Although I think a lot of people have fear of flying, so you'd get a lot of false reads as well. But these are the kinds of ideas that are being kicked around by military planners around the world. When you think about, again, the body as in terms of its energy and the way we relate to energy, this is a very, very important concept, and it goes back to the very ancients. You know what? Earlier in this presentation, I talked about the idea that around us is 200 million times more radio frequency energy than the Earth naturally produces. That radio frequency energy has been made by mankind and only includes one very small part of this continuum called the electromagnetic spectrum. When you add up all the energy that man has added into an environment, it's a tremendous difference. The idea of being immersed in a sea of energy and not really sensing it or noting it, I'll tell you when you really see the difference. When power grids shut down Most people immediately notice how quiet it is because the refrigerator's not humming, the fan motors aren't humming in your computer, and so on. But if you think of the general state of your body when the energy fails, it's almost like you've exhaled as your whole body relaxes. Think about it the next time the power goes out, or if you want to run an experiment at home, go to your circuit breaker in your house and break the power coming into your house and notice the difference as your body relaxes, because your body constantly has to create equilibrium. So a certain level of stress is created within our physiology, within our bodies, to mitigate, to compensate for those external fields that dominate so much of our lives today. I mean, just in the room that I'm standing in today, we are surrounded by a 60 hertz grid, 60 pulses per second. This is in the high beta range. This is an agitating range for the human body. And so we're always in this constant state in the United States and Canada, where we have 60 cycles, where we're always just a little bit on edge, and we only notice the change when the power goes out. The other thing that you notice is the connection. When you think about what do most of us do when we walk into our house? We kick off our shoes. Why do we do that? People say, well, I feel more relaxed. Why do you feel relaxed? When you think about the insulators on the bottom of your feet, you're separated by the ground, you're separated from the ground. The earth has a natural oscillation, a natural pulse. It's called Schumann's resonance. It was discovered in Germany, in Munich, in the early 1950s. And the pulse rate of the planet is 7.83 hertz. 7.83 hertz, right in the middle of the alpha range, the ideal state for human learning, the ideal state for a creativity, and it happens to be the literal pulse of this planet. As we separate ourselves from that and lock on to those stronger energy fields now that are 60 cycles and higher, it explains a lot of the general stress that we see manifesting itself in the industrialized world that doesn't exist in the less industrialized parts of the planet. So that's an important consideration. Now, there was a segment that was run on the Discovery Channel a number of years ago, and it was on the Iceman, and many will remember this. They found this guy up in the northern Italy, southern Germany, or Switzerland, depending on whose side you're on the argument. Apparently it was right on the border. And melting out of a glacier was a person that was 5,000 years old. Well, they began to look at what he was carrying, and they discovered that he had medicinal herbs and other things that we know about today, but we didn't know that they had this knowledge 5,000 years ago. As they were doing the autopsy on this man, what they found also was a number of tattoos covering his body. It just so happens that one of those people in the autopsy room noticed that these tattoos lined up with acupuncture points and acupuncture meridians. So they decided to take a look and see if this person actually had illnesses or disorders that were associated with those acupuncture points and acupuncture meridians. Not surprisingly to me, but surprisingly to those that were in the room, was in fact that knowledge was there. These points absolutely correlated. This reminds me of another story, and I'll tell you the story and then I'll bring the two together. A good friend of mine was a physicist specializing in the effects of electromagnetic energy on the human body. His name was Reijo Michaela. And Dr. Michaela lived in Finland. He did a lot of work in Australia. He did a lot of work around the world, but was extremely well known in his part of the world for understanding the interactions between energy and human health. During his early work in the 70s, he began to take a look at mapping the human body. And what he discovered is all over the human body, there were places where our skin resistance differed. In other words, where there were concentrations of energy versus no concentration. He began to map these. He brought in graduate students, and this was done at Queensland University in Australia. And what he found was that as he brought people in, tested them, that everybody manifested these exact same concentration points of energy, and he began to map them. He mapped the front and the back of the body through a number of years. And one day a guy came into his study and said, Dr. Michaela, why do you have an acupuncture chart on the wall? And Dr. Michaela laughed and goes, no, this is my work. I've been doing this for 2 years, measuring skin resistance on the surface of the body, the electrical properties on the surface of the skin. And the next day, that student went away and he brought one of these old charts in. And this is an interesting illustration. It's one of these kinds of diagrams. These are by the ancient Chinese. We go back thousands of years, but not 5,000 years, not the age of the Iceman. So where did the Iceman in Europe have the same knowledge as those in China? Back, separated by thousands of miles as well as thousands of years. And this is what my theory is, and this is strictly a theory, and I want to differentiate that from factual information, because that's what theories are, ideas that may help explain what we otherwise don't understand. Now, the arguments that we heard was, well, gee, how did the Chinese get the information into Europe? Or how did the Europeans get the information into China? How about this idea? Take away all the background noise. All of the things that we've created as mankind, take them out of the picture. And perhaps human beings, some human beings, were highly sensitive, were able to differentiate on the surface of the skin these very, very subtle differences that Reijo Michela discovered 2,000 to 5,000 years after Europeans and Asians. Now let's go back and let's talk about this basic idea. This instrument, this is a pointer plus, and this is actually an acupuncture tool that has two functions. Its first function is to locate the points, to locate the acupuncture points on the body accurately by measuring the differences in the electrical properties on the surface of the skin. As an example, an acupuncture point on the index finger on this side of the fingernail is well known and is charted in all of the charts, whether they go back to ancient China or the modern world. This device, the Pointer Plus, is actually an electroacupuncture device, and the first thing I want to show is how it actually detects a point. And this will make a loop. So there's power coming through here, and there's a circuit that's completed if I actually go all the way around. So let me turn it on. There's power circulating through, and I'm locating a point, and when I hit that point, I get an auditory signal, and I get a bright light. Now what I can also do is by depressing this trigger mechanism, I actually send energy into that point that I perceive as a very, very light, almost like the dusting of a feather. Just a little slight pulsing sensation. If it's more than that, the power's too high and it becomes uncomfortable. But basically what I'm doing, instead of needling, I'm sending in just a little bit of electrical energy to stimulate that particular point. But all of the points on the body can be found utilizing an instrument like this. Now, this is sort of the modern equivalent of those sensitives that could actually locate those points by their hypersensitive touch or their electronic sensitivity and be able to detect those very subtle differences. Because these acupuncture points don't line up with the normal nerve bundles. They don't line up with muscle tissue. They don't line up with the circulatory system or of the body in terms of moving the blood around. This is a fourth system, the energetic system of the body, well known now and well understood. The place where I got my doctorate in traditional and complementary medicine was actually founded by a gentleman, Anton Jarosaraya, who was the first WHO fellow, World Health Organization fellow, to go into China and study acupuncture in the 50s and bring it back to the West in the 60s. But it wasn't until probably the latter part of the 1980s that the mainstream science finally accepted what the ancients have known forever, that affecting the energetic system of the body as a starting point is where health practitioners in Asia started and where they continue to operate today. This is probably the area where the most exciting breakthroughs in science will emerge in our lifetimes. The idea of electrophysiology, electromedicine will be the mainstays, replacing what we've seen in the pharmaceutical models and the chemical models of the last century. That's what I think we need to look forward to, and in looking forward to that, it becomes a whole different system of addressing health. Unlike chemicals, which work very quickly, this type of approach to health tends to take a little bit more time, and it's not just the effect of affecting the energetic system of the body, but also making sure the body has the basic nutrients available to it through the foods we eat or the supplements we take. Again, getting back to the things that we've sort of lost in our modern diets. We need the right building blocks in the body, then we need to be in the right energy state to take advantage of those building blocks to build a healthy body and a healthy mind. And that's what the future offers and a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is about. This particular device is one that we think is quite useful, has been used all over the world, and there's lots of different versions of this, and we'll show another version of this as we get through the day. All right, we're going to demonstrate some of these basic tools. I'm going to make myself a little bit more comfortable. It's a little bit warm in here with all the lights. But we want to get a little bit more of a practical look at sort of how some of these tools that I've been talking about really work, what they do, and some of the ways that they can be beneficial in our own lives. And again, to kind of take away, so much of my work in the past has been centered on military activities, military affairs, and sort of the sinister uses of good technology. And technology's a two-edged sword in real terms. A truck can be used to deliver your mail, or it can be used by a bomber to blow up your house. So technology is not bad in and of itself. It's really the intent of the operator. And in this case, these are tools that I consider tools that deliver to individuals the power to take control over certain parts of our life and enhance our own innate natural abilities in ways that allow us to better perform. Light and sound I've talked a little bit about in terms of sort of the negative effects. I mentioned in one of the earlier segments this discussion about the Japanese kids that were watching a cartoon had this epileptic seizures event. Now, an important thing to note about light and sound devices: if you have any history of epilepsy, you cannot use these technologies because the light itself will trigger those kinds of seizures in people that are already very sensitive in that area. That's why your physician tells you not to go into bars or clubs or dance halls where they have strobe lights flashing, for instance, if you have history of epilepsy. You can, however, use the sound component, the binaural beat, and there's never been any reports of adverse actions there, because it's strictly just sound creating an entrainment effect for a very, very specific type of enhancement. But this is a device, the Orion Light and Sound. It essentially is a headset and a pair of glasses. Now, the thing with light devices is you don't keep your eyes open. When you put these glasses on, you actually close your eyes, and you'll see when I turn this on, you'll see the little flickering light. You can adjust the light volume, but you close the eyes, and the light actually easily passes through the eyelids, and you have the same effect, but again, you're more relaxed state when you can close your eyes. So the first thing is to set a program. This particular device has a little over 20 preset programs, and this is the one that I use predominantly. There are more sophisticated devices that you can self-program, you can do a lot of other things with. I particularly like this because it's simple. It has 3 buttons and an on and off switch. That's the Nick Begich 3-button rule. If it's got more than that, it gets too complicated for most people to use as a practical matter. Now, this device is used primarily for 4 main areas. Although there's 20 different programs, those 4 areas are meditation, relaxation, accelerated learning, and enhancing creative work or creative capacity. Now, within those areas, this device through binaural beat, and that's again to remind folks, this is where a sound signal comes in at one frequency in one ear and another frequency in the other ear. So for instance, within the range of human hearing, approximately 1,500 cycles per second to about 20,000 cycles per second. This is the range, the frequency range for most human beings. Some can get very sensitive hearing that maybe goes down to lower frequency. Some have higher frequency sensitivity and can hear a little bit beyond that range, but that's pretty much the range of human beings. Marine mammals, for instance, dolphins can hear up to 250,000 cycles per second, much, much beyond in the high frequency range beyond a human being. Elephants, on the other hand, can hear in the very, very low frequency range, the ELF range, below 100 cycles per second. In fact, just as a point of interest, people were kind of mystified in this recent tsunami in Asia because the animals didn't appear to have suffered in the way that human beings had, and people were wondering, what actually happened. A sound wave traveling through the water, through the oceans and through land, actually travels 3 times to 4 times faster than that surface wave of actual tidal wave action coming. So animals that can hear low frequency sounds actually heard it coming at them several hours before the actual wave hit. They actually heard the earthquake go. For those of us that live in earthquake regions, most of us know that before the earthquake hits, there's usually an auditory signal. You actually hear it coming, like a freight train coming down the track. So animals with that sensitivity actually pick it up, but for the brain to hear low frequency sounds, you need this binaural beat, this cancellation effect where the signals cancel. So say one signal comes in again at 16,000 cycles per second or pulses per second in one ear, 16,007 comes in at the other ear, they cancel and leave that beat frequency of 7 hertz. Essentially, that's how light and sound devices work, and what you'll see when I activate this particular unit, you'll actually see the flickering effect of the lights. And let me turn the volume of that flicker up so you can actually see it contrasting in this particular light. So it's that flicker effect. As you're watching the light flicker, it literally, the brain entrains to the flicker rate, changing brain chemistry, altering consciousness, and changing your mental state and your ability to either absorb information, relax, meditate, or engage in creative work. Now, the other interesting thing about these devices is, again, they're simple to use, or relatively, this is probably the least expensive device on the market. Others get much more complicated. This one in particular will actually interface with a computer. So you can plug into your computer. This one has over 60 preset functions, as well as you can adjust the time, the volume, the intensity, the tone, the frequency, the pitch, and the mode. So you can change any number of these parameters and create your own. This is more for really advanced researchers in light and sound technologies. It's not recommended for the average person. It's too complicated, too much, too many parameters, and without a lot of basic knowledge, these are not very useful as a practical matter. The simpler units are much more effective. The other thing that I don't care for is an interface directly with the computer. The interface in this case goes into a central website where you can download additional programs into your computer and run them. I don't like that kind of interface. I prefer to deal with material off the web for a number of reasons. But nonetheless, good technology, very stout technology, and used now literally around the world. Now, there were some individuals that had made specific health claims related to these kinds of devices. They are no longer on the market. FDA shut them down. The very same devices are still available without the claims associated with them. The main thing is the light effects are well understood. The other thing that happens with light and sound devices is your blood chemistry changes. You can actually measure blood chemistry. You can actually see those changes within the blood workups. And you can actually look at how your body's reacting to light and sound. And this is something that has been done. We actually published a publication in the Earth Pulse Flashpoints. It's an actual 60-page booklet that breaks down, I think, 4 or 5 studies of light and sound devices specifically. So folks that are more interested in getting follow-on data, it's available there. You can also go on the web, and a tremendous amount of information is available out there today on light and sound devices. Another device for brain entrainment, and one that I no longer carry, and one that I don't really care too much for, but I want to at least demonstrate it a little bit for purposes of knowing there's lots of ways to get energy into the body to have these very same changes. In this case, the reason I don't like it is it requires a 4 contact points. And this is done with a headband. This has gotten a little bit of use, but you need contact gels. So that's the first thing I don't like about it, is the idea that you have to have moistened material when it makes contact with the skin so you get good conductivity. In this case, what happens is essentially very similar. This is the on and off switch and sets the power level. This switch actually sets the frequency, and this frequency ranges from a fraction of a hertz up to about 12.5 hertz, which covers all of those main areas that we're interested in: the delta, the theta, the alpha, and the beta ranges in the low beta ranges. And for learning, for concentration, for relaxation, essentially exactly the same uses as light and sound, but in this case we're using electric current. We're using electric current rather than light or sound to carry that pulse rate. And so, as an example, I'm not going to hook this up to my head, but I'll give you an example. If we make contact so that you can see what happens with the meter, we'll kick the power up high enough. And as I said, you need a little bit of moisture, so I'm going to wet that a little bit. And what you'll see is a needle will pulse within the green range. You see that pulse rate, and that's essentially electrical energy coming into the body. In this case, it would be, these electrodes would be placed in this location. There would be 2 here approximately and 2 behind the ears. So you get across the cranium this pulsing stimulating field. The electromagnetic field the brain locks onto and begins to mirror the effect much in the same way, exactly the same way as the light and sound device. In this case, a little sloppier to use, a little tougher to use, as you just saw, but an interesting device nonetheless. These are, I've not seen very many of these left on the market, mainly because of the inconvenience of use. But again, several ways to get the brain to oscillate in a different way at a different beat frequency. One of the other interesting areas when you talk about the energetic system of the body, I want to go back for a moment to the idea of electroacupuncture, which we were talking about briefly. There's been other observations about energy and the human body back in the 30s, actually, 1930s, in Eastern Europe. The development of Carillion photography, and this is the idea of being able to photograph the energy discharging from the human body. In this case, these are my fingertips, and this is photographed by putting my fingertips within an electromagnetic field generated by a Tesla coil, and by touching a photographic plate in the dark. What happens is the photographic film actually catches photon energy and light discharges coming off of the surface of the skin, in this case my fingertips. The camera that was used is a Carillion camera. This is an example of one. Now you see people who purport to have Carillion cameras often in fairs, New Age shows, this kind of thing. They're not necessarily the true Carillion photography. What they're doing is measuring skin resistances on the surface of the hands when you place them on a plate. And those skin resistance differentials give you some variability, so you get some energy patterns. The original cameras, actually, you would have to touch a conductor, this conductive material which actually loops through, and so when you touch that photographic plate, you actually do get a bit of a shock. I mean, your tendency is to pull away. It won't hurt you, but it's a little bit uncomfortable. So while you're getting that energy discharge and you're placing your hands in the dark through a sleeve to where you're actually touching what is a photographic plate on the inside. And this is the inside where the photographic plate would actually make contact to the skin. So the Carillion cameras are interesting for demonstrating that there is actually this energy coming from the body. Now, one of the other instruments that we didn't demonstrate, this one has a single function. This one strictly locates the acupuncture points. This can be used for massage therapy, acupressure, where you're not using needling, but you want to be accurate. You want to hit specific points that may affect very specific parts of our physiology. So what happens here is, again, you have to make physical contact. You have to loop around. So in this case, you have the probe to help locate the point, and then you have to have a conductor. You have to be able to physically complete that circuit so the electricity can flow through the entire body and be amplified in those specific points where you get a signal. And in this case, what you'll see, there's an acupuncture point again on the inside of my index finger. So I'm going to try and locate that point. And as you can see, very efficiently, I find that point both with a light and a sound signal. And as soon as I move off the point, the intensity of the signal decreases. Now, this has a sensitivity knob, and the reason it has it is everyone's skin resistance is a little bit different. So some people with particularly dry skin might have to turn it up really high in order to pick up all of the points on the body. On the other hand, places on the body where there's lots of energy being discharged, like the palms of the hand and the soles of the feet, you'd want to kick the sensitivity down. And I'll give you a good example of that. As I touch anywhere on the surface of my hand, you can see that it picks up a signal, even though there's no particular point associated in that way. If I cut it down, in power, it'll only locate the points that are actually there. And I'll have to mess around with it a little bit to find those fire points within the hand. You can adjust it. But basically it's an adjustment to sensitivity, again taking into consideration skin resistance, the very thing that allows us to find the points in the first place, and the variability between people so that one device can work for all. This one is an excellent device for locating points. It's a low-cost device for doing that, but it doesn't energize the points. Now the other device that I had shown earlier, this one also has both the locator function and the energizing function. And why I like this device is it's portable, it's easy to use, it's the one I travel with. The other reason I like it is I'm not big on needling. And most Westerners aren't. When you talk about acupuncture, usually the first reaction you get is, I don't want any needles in me. This is another way to deliver energy to the body, avoiding the needling and the discomfort associated with it. This is not an uncomfortable sensation, but a very powerful one, because even in the needling, there's a certain amount of interaction between the person operating that needle and the person that's receiving that needle. In this case, energy is deliberately pushed in. Now, my friend Reijo Michaela, Dr. Michaela, who I had mentioned earlier, went a step further, and he developed an electro laser system for acupuncture. And in this case, he uses a class 4 laser. This isn't a laser that burns tissue or burns material. It's right below that level. It's very powerful. It's not like one of these little pointers that you see in the novelty shops and in lectures, often these small lasers. It's something in between the burning laser and the pointing laser, the class 3. And what they were able to do is take the class 3 laser, which has about a 2.5 millimeter head where the light actually comes out, and then around that head place an electrode that actually pulses energy in that harmonizes with the light energy that's also going in, but a much, much different effect. As an example, when I went to see Reijo in 1994, I spent a week with him in his lab and his clinic. He took this system into Finland and actually was challenged by the medical authorities there, similar to our American Medical Association here. They challenged him all the way to the highest court in the land in Finland. And my friend Reijo Michaela won his case and was able to train 15 practitioners in electrolaser methods before he passed away, a method permitted by the medical authorities in Finland and in other European countries today, and practiced by very few practitioners within the United States. But here's what he did for me. Reijo first took a look at my general health, utilizing the normal tools of an MD. You check blood pressure and temperature and all the basic perimeters that most physicians engage in. The other thing he did is take a look at not my blood work, but my urine, and analyze that. And he's also an iridiologist, someone that studies the iris and can connect disorders within the body to manifestations that show up in the iris. And iridiology is well known. Anyone who studies this field will find very similar things. The body projects through the eyes its state of health. And so Reijo analyzed, using the traditional Western methods and non-traditional methods, my health, and he concluded that I had pneumonia at one time, or some lung disorder that caused me to have scarring in one lung that was significant comparably to the other. Now that was interesting, because what Reijo didn't know is a couple of years before I had double pneumonia and had been hospitalized, and that was exactly my condition. So what he said was that he was going to show me how electrolaser acupuncture works in rechanneling energy in the body. So the first thing he did is he went through a liver point, and this liver point, this lung point, what he did was he wanted to show me how energy could come into the body, affect the primary lung points, which are on the chest, and what he said is, without coming anywhere near my chest area, but affecting other lung points in the ear, he was able to show energy coming through the body. And what you saw on my chest was 2 red dots about the size of a dime, about 1 centimeter in diameter, appear on my chest. No contact, perfectly circular in form, one very much intensely red and the other one sort of a dull pinkish color, correlating with which lung had the most damage and which lung didn't. Now, what also I noticed coming through that point where the energy was coming in through the ear was first starting as a slight, like pulsing sensation, and then getting more intense till it was a rhythmic pinching sensation, until it became so intense I couldn't stand it anymore and I had to have him take the instrument away. Now, what he said to me, and again, looking at my general physiology, my liver was in excellent shape, so he went through a liver point, never adjusted the settings on the instrument as far as intensity. And on that setting, going through the liver, which was functioning normally, there was no sense of pain, just that slight oscillating, pulsing sensation, but it never elevated, it never increased. And why it never increased is the energy flowed through the acupuncture meridians and came back around, flowing through the meridians as it was supposed to, as it was intended, not getting blocked, where then skin resistance, the blockage actually sent the energy back to the point of entry, creating an irritation on the nerve endings at that point of entry, which is where that pain in the ear points came in when they were trying to affect my lungs. Now, what was interesting about all of that is to see that physical manifestation, to see that energy delivered where those primary lung points clearly show it. Now, how did this process work in treating patients? And Reho, before he died, treated over 16,000 patients with a number of different disorders. And what happened in a week to 6 week treatments, because you'd go in every day for 30 minutes and get the same treatment 5 days a week, sometimes for a week, sometimes 6 or 8 weeks, depending on the disorder. Because this system of acupuncture generally does not work instantly in many, many cases. It takes time. The kinds of things that Reho was treating, things that are considered incurable in the West. He treated successfully MS, diabetes, various forms of cancer. When people say they've got a cure for cancer, be a little bit skeptical in the sense that there's over 700 types of cancer, so people need to be a little bit more specific. Reho had success with very narrow bands of cancer and other disorders within the body. But his work, what was interesting about it is being carried forward, but it didn't just include electrolaser acupuncture. It also included the proper nutrient supplements and the proper foods in order to make sure that the building blocks for the body were also present as you try to rebalance the system so that energy flows, and then what manifests from that is essentially good health. The other instruments, this is one of the earlier instruments that I became acquainted with. Again, another electroacupuncture instrument. This one has a locator function as well as a ability to discharge energy. It uses more of a point. It has more of an irritation when it makes contact with the skin. So it's one that I don't particularly care for. I like the manual, however, that came with this was an excellent book. Simple Health Maintenance. Unfortunately, the book is not available in the United States, but very similar titles are. And these books basically will break down a disorder. It'll lay out then the appropriate points to treat. It'll lay out generally what supplements a person would need to also take as you're rebalancing the body. And you'll see lots of different purposes for acupuncture, this written specifically for laser electroacupuncture. But there are many, many books available for this purpose. When you look at acupuncture titles, any of them are good. One of the ones that we carry, Healing with Pressure Point Therapy. This one actually breaks down 100 common ailments and then actually lays out not just the points that you would treat, but also the nutritional supplements, foods that are beneficial for also affecting those particular ailments. The Chinese developed really good systems, and the main thing to know is it's not any particular book. Find the one that you're the most comfortable with. You know, every person in the healing arts specializes, even in the acupuncture areas. So when you go to the Barnes & Nobles or the Amazon.coms or the bookstores of your choice, look at the acupuncture section, and generally there's usually 7 or 8 or even 10 titles. Take a look at which one best address the issues that you're interested in, and that's the book for you. The points all line up the same. It's really the depth of experience that the practitioner has in terms of supplements, dietary habits, and the other things that they recommend that go along with acupuncture. And again, I would say the balance between the Western science and the Asian sciences is a balance that that should be paid attention to. In any case, thinking about acupuncture in the general sense as it applies to us individually, striking that balance is really what it's about. It's good to get good medical advice before you use any technology, and once getting that medical advice, make informed decisions about what's good for your health. And again, these are tools to improve human performance, not necessarily replace MDs or Western medicine, as much as it is to supplement and complement. It's not an alternative, it's a complement to the medicine that we all surround ourselves with today. And my view has always been approach things from the least invasive to the most invasive. And I think this is where often we rush to sort of the last step instead of the first step in the process of improving our health. So striking that balance is probably more important on the front end of disorders and disease and ailments to make sure we're making the right decisions for ourselves individually. The next area I want to talk a little bit about is this concept of biofeedback. And I mentioned brain biofeedback, and I don't have the instruments to demonstrate for that here. But if you're interested in brain biofeedback, there is an organization in Denver, the Biofeedback Association. They're the only certifying body in the country. So if you're looking for a practitioner of biofeedback in your area, particularly the idea of being able to affect brain activity for children or for adults, very useful in stroke recovery, addiction issues, behavioral issues, and attention deficit issues. These are very, very useful. But Denver is where to call. If you call information there, Biofeedback Association, get the names of practitioners in your area, and then you can deal with those opportunities as they come about. But on a more localized scale, what is within the range of people's ability to do? This particular device I like. This is just for relaxation, and it incorporates what are called muscle tensiometers, which are these three small metal discs. And what they do is they pick up energy from the body, translate that energy in terms of muscle tension. And when you tense up your muscles, there's actual changes in skin resistance on the surface of the skin that can be measured. So what happens? Well, many people know the concept of kinesiology as an example. Kinesiology people use, and it's where they're, and if you don't know what the word is, you'll maybe remember the image. It's somebody holding some substance in one hand, and there's somebody pushing their arm down with the other, and they're seeing how much muscle resistance there is. So maybe you hold aluminum in this hand and it has a detrimental effect on you, so you're weak. Or you hold something in this hand that gives you strength, and then they can't, break the arm down. But it's all subjective. I mean, you don't really know, is he really pushing as hard? Muscle tensiometers you can actually put around this portion of the arm, and they actually measure muscle tension, so it is objective, not subjective. In other words, you can see a needle or a digital readout and see exactly what's going on with the muscle. Incorporating muscle tensiometers, in this case, these three points fit into a headband. It fits on the head, so these 3 points hit right about here. And if you ever notice when someone's stressed, they wrinkle up their brow when they're relaxed. The muscles here are very, very relaxed. So what happens with this device, as your muscles tense, you get in the headset a very high-pitched sound. And as you relax, the sound goes down. So it goes real high, and the lower you get the sound, the more relaxed your body is. So you get feedback. You get that interaction, like learning how to ride the bicycle, the example I used earlier. Is doing it without the feedback makes it very tough. Meditators spend 20 years learning how to meditate, sometimes, 20 years. Now, why does it take so long? It's because when they hit that ideal zone, it's for that few seconds, and they remember, that's what that feels like. The next time it's a little easier to get there, and the next time a little easier to get there. And then eventually they get to that place and they do it very efficiently. Now they want to dive deeper. And over 20 years they learn how to dive deeper and recognize those signals. With feedback, with neurobiofeedback and brain biofeedback, it has been proven that people can reach the same mental state as the 20-year meditator using biofeedback once a day for an hour a day, learning how to drive to those lower states in 30 to 60 days. That is phenomenal. And this isn't done anecdotally. This is done with thousands of trials showing how you can entrain the brain, drive the brain activity down, and then learn how to modulate your own brain activity. This particular device I no longer carry, but it is available through Tools for Exploration. You can find them on the internet. It's very simple. It's about $100. It's the kind of tool that a guy can use at the end of a workday when you're totally stressed out and you just need to unwind. This helps you learn how to do it. After 30 to 60 days, you can put this on the shelf or hand it to somebody else because you can get there on your own. And that's a key thing in a busy, hectic life, being able to learn how to relax, reduce those stress levels, and recognize relaxation in terms of the general sense of the body, and being able to get there quickly and efficiently. Even midday, in the middle of the day with an intense schedule, it's nice to be able to create an environment where you can relax and learn how to really work with your own physiology to accomplish that. This instrument is also a biofeedback device. This device, the thought stream, actually measures skin resistance, in this case with a probe that fits on the palm where the palms sweat a little bit, and you make a decent contact. When the device is clicked on, it actually has a headset, so you get an auditory signal, so you can close your eyes, you don't have to look for a visual signal, and you can relax. And it's the same basic idea. The sound starts very high up and then drops down to a lower and lower pitch as you start to relax. Now, what I'm going to show with this device is I'm going to set it up so that it's on, and what you'll see first is you'll see a light signal. And this is just the light signal setting itself for my energy state and for my skin resistance. And so as this signal gets to red, the objective is to get it to go from red to green, and it'll go red, orange, and start to work its way down as I relax. So I'm going to try and relax just for a second here and see if we can get this to drop. Well, I guess making a film doesn't give me the chance. Well, there's a little bit. It's dropping a little bit down from the bright red, and if I relax, you'll see it drop down into the orange. And essentially, what this is doing is giving me a visual signal. At the same time, there's an auditory signal if I had the headset on, which would tell me that I'm getting more and more relaxed. And I can adjust the sensitivity on this instrument and the volume on the instrument so that I can get deeper and deeper and deeper into more relaxed states. This one's just a little more complicated than the headset. Of the two, the headset is the simpler technology to use. Now, they have more sophisticated brain biofeedback instruments. They run into thousands of dollars. The Mind Mirror is one which actually lays out with light bands that go across the visual screen, both hemispheres of the brain, so you can not only slow the body down, but make sure both hemispheres are basically energized at approximately the same energy state. So you maintain that optimum brain balancing performance at the same time that you're relaxing or going into those particular mental states that you're desiring to go to. So biofeedback is one way. This teaches you to do it on your own. Light and sound instruments drive you there. In other words, there is no learning. You're there within a minute and you stay there. People with sleep disorders, light and sound devices are extremely effective for putting you to sleep because they immediately entrain the brain into those relaxed states, whereas this is a training tool to learn how to do it yourself. The next instruments I want to show really are some of the leading edge instruments in technology and devices that I'm particularly proud of. But first, let's go back for a moment to this idea of hemispheric balance and brain entrainment. Again, to remind the viewers, the brain in normal state usually has one area or another that tends to dominate. Usually it's on one side of the brain or the other, and the energy distribution across the brain is not so uniform. Yet, when we use brain enhancement technologies, in this case we're using HemiSync, we actually create a binaural beat. You can see the headset graphically illustrated. Both hemispheres of the brain then begin to resonate, harmonize. So the energy distribution becomes even, and you can see from the red bands and the various color bands how that energy distributes itself across the human brain. This idea, binaural beat, which I explained earlier, actually ended up being put into soundtracks. These soundtracks are CD or tapes, and essentially they're each designed for very specific things. There's probably about 100 of them out there now, different versions for different effects, whether it's attention deficit disorders, stress, enhanced learning, meditation, etc. We carry these because they work. One of the big things that, as we looked out over all the things that are out there in the marketplace, we wanted something that has been proven time and time again. Over 60,000 people went through the Monroe Institute in Virginia as they developed each of these programs. And so there's two separate tracks involved. One strictly uses tones and sound to create the effects, and sometimes they'll overlay on those tones and sounds, classical music, or what have you, to make it more pleasant to listen to. But these tones and sounds, essentially you relax, the brain automatically tunes in, captures that binaural beat frequency, and begins to move as those CDs and tapes were designed, so for relaxation, learning, etc. The straight sound signals, for instance, for learning, there's a couple of tracks where you can actually plug the sound signal in, put on your headset, and you must use a headset with HemiSync to be effective, and then read your material or watch your normal visual material. But at that point, both hemispheres are working together. You're absorbing the information much more efficiently for language learning or any type of learning applications. Extremely useful. You can plug in, for instance, your lecture in your college class or a particular learning program that you're interested in. Virtually any auditory information that you can get in conjunction with creating that signal. Now, the other interesting thing, and something I failed to mention when I was talking about light and sound devices, is even the low-end light and sound devices will allow you to jack in an external audio input. In other words, that lecture or that auditory information that you want to commit to memory or to learn. So there's lots of ways to get it in. HemiSync is very effective. Now, the other way that HemiSync is effective is they use subliminals. Now, these subliminals are interesting in this regard. If you have a multi-track stereo, you can actually hear exactly what the words are that are being said. And this is extremely important. You don't concentrate on the words, you concentrate on the music, which gets you into that relaxed state, and the words become the programming. Now, the programming is important because words are symbols for thoughts, and they mean different things to different people. So my words describing, for instance, a dog. For some people, they get warm, fuzzy feelings when they hear the word dog. Other people's get gripped with fear because their experiences aren't the same as yours. Word symbols have a lot to do with how you take the information in, and you want to make sure those word symbols line up with your belief system. So subliminals, any subliminal, you want to know exactly what's said, exactly how that information is delivered before you subject yourself to it. Because here's what happens with all these technologies. They put you into a super suggestive state where the information flows past that normal filter that filters out right and wrong, good and evil, the things that line up with our beliefs and the things that don't, and it dumps information directly in to long-term memory. So you don't want to put information in that conflicts with your normal beliefs. Always look at your subliminals, no matter who's producing them. Make sure they line up with your belief systems. Now, I want to jump a little bit from HemiSync. HemiSync I also like because it's specific in the sense that if there's one thing you're particularly interested in achieving, whether it's learning or meditation, you can get one item to do the job. $20 versus several hundred for more sophisticated equipment. Again, take the least costly, least invasive approach to solving issues or problems or increasing performance and move from there. And HemiSync is really the least invasive of all technologies I've demonstrated today. Now, the other technology I want to show a little bit about is it started with the Flanagan Neurophone, and this is a mid-level version. There were earlier versions going back to the 60s. More modern versions have been made. This is one that was hand-built by the inventor. And actually, what this does is it uses a couple of things, and then I'm going to show you the advancements in the technology. What this does is take a sound signal. Now, normally, how does sound enter the body? This thing we call an ear is really an array. it actually captures a sound wave as it hits the body, and this condenses the sound wave, the outer ear, into the inner ear, where it then hits the eardrum, creates a vibration. On the other side of that eardrum is a little bit of fluid. That vibration moves through that fluid, begins to vibrate 3 small bones in the inner ear, and then moves eventually to the 8th cranial nerve, where an electromagnetic signal actually transits the nerve, ends up in the auditory portions of the brain where we hear what you hear today, sound. Now if I distort the array, if I distort my ear, both of them, and I close my eyes, and somebody jingles a set of keys, if I leave the ear as normal, I'll be able with pretty good accuracy tell pretty much where that sound is coming from. If I distort the array, it becomes much more difficult to isolate sound. So this isolates direction, isolates where sound is coming from. The next thing is that conditioning that happens in between. It's where the signal gets transferred into a pattern of transmission that the brain understands. Now, what Patrick Flanagan discovered was a way to replicate what the inner ear does. In other words, to take a sound signal, condition it in such a way so you can bring it in bypassing the 8th cranial nerve, normally thought to be responsible for all auditory input into the brain, and you can actually perceive sound, bringing it in through other parts of the nervous system, or perhaps that energetic system, that 4th system we talked about earlier, which is the acupuncture system of the body. The judge is still out on how the information gets in. Most recently, in the last few days, there was an article in our local paper talking about sound that's actually perceived from the auroral discharge. You know, some people hear it and some people don't. They really don't understand the mechanism by which that sound gets into the head. I'd suggest that it's a very similar mechanism to the one I'm about to demonstrate today. Now, what we did is we advanced the technology significantly. An incredible inventor in Germany, Robert Thiedemann, actually took the old concepts of the neurophonic technology, which included about a 30 components on an electronic board in this box to create a sound that you could perceive literally in the center of the head. What we did is Robert took the ideas, advanced them substantially, and created a much finer circuit. Over 170 components involved in the design of this circuit, which allowed us to get much deeper frequency ranges, lower frequency, and much higher frequency range delivered into the brain. Now what happens with this, unlike a standard auditory signal, the ears aren't involved. What happens is the signal is conditioned. In this case, we're going to use a standard CD player. I've got Bach playing on this CD player, and as classical music, it's routed through this device, through its circuitry. About midway through the circuit, there is an electro-optical coupler. Now, the electrical-optical coupler changes a flow of electrons, the electricity, to a flow of photons, light energy, converts it back to electricity, where then it moves on to the body. Now, we put that converter in there essentially to break the circuit, because although we're attached just to a CD player, if you hook this up to a home stereo or a computer where you're actually hooked into the wall with AC power, you don't want power to arc across the circuit and into the body, because at the end of this we're going to have what are called piezoelectric transducers. They have a metal contact point, and when we make contact with these, we actually transit current through the body. And if you listen carefully, you'll hear a little bit of an energy discharge. These have a ceramic material on the back of these metal plates. As electric current hits that ceramic material, it causes it to expand and contract. And what that does is create a slight drumming effect on the surface of this metal plate. That drumming effect then creates a sound that you can hear with the normal ear. So for example, when I complete the circuit, right now you hear nothing. But if I complete the circuit by touching the other transducer with my fingertips, sound will transit through, and you'll hear it. Now, what you can't hear on the camera, but you can hear in the room, if I actually place this on my temples and block my outer ears, the sound is internalized. The sound is actually heard as if it were originating in the center of my cranium. Now, when you're out of balance energetically, when you're looking more like this, what you'll find is the energy will stay on one side or the other. In other words, you'll perceive the sound as if it's sitting over here somewhere in your head. Within about a minute of use, the energy centers. As both hemispheres begin to beat together, you get exactly the same effect, only it's created as a condition of use, not the input signal. In other words, any input signal creates this kind of balance in both hemispheres. Where this has been particularly effective in Germany is the combination of hemisync technologies together with this delivery system. And the reason being is you're not just getting it through the normal auditory channel, you're getting it through another auditory channel, increasing the inputs. Now, when you listen to it, if you were actually to hook up, and you can with this instrument, you can hook up a regular headset and listen to that headset. You can then put on the piezoelectric transducers, and what you end up with it is a three-dimensional sound. The same kind of difference that you would perceive by listening to AM versus FM, where the sound volume and quality fills out with FM. Listening to FM versus this technology, it fills out one more level. So you even get more enhanced sound. For gaming and for some of those kinds of things, it could be quite interesting. But for brain enhancement, body balancing, where this has been used, these technologies have been used, is by introducing electrons, which is essentially what you're doing. You're creating an energy flow through the body. Electrons are being delivered to the body. They enhance your overall energetic state. They balance the hemispheres. They also balance the acupuncture meridians, and it shows up. A week or so later, your system is still in balance after about a half-hour use, assuming that you don't experience some huge stress levels or some traumatic event which throws your equilibrium out. But generally speaking, it manages balance, allows for increased learning, enhanced performance. Now, this technology, as I said, was developed for Earth Pulse. We hold the U.S. patents. Our colleagues in Germany hold the international patents for the technology. We are just introducing this as one of the leading edge learning technologies available now. The idea behind this technology is, again, to advance it even further, to miniaturize the circuit. Where we're really excited is the potential applications for hearing impaired. Initially, as we tested the device, field tested the device, we found that certain individuals with hearing impairments or hearing loss, particularly in the high frequency range, were able to regain that high frequency loss. The other thing we found is sound signals above the normal range of hearing, up to the carrier frequency of 40,000 hertz, could be perceived by people using this. So you get even more range. If you listen to a standard headset and you listen for that high fidelity sound that's being laid down on the sound track with normal headset, it only goes so far. You put on the transducers and it jumps another level. You actually catch the higher fidelity sound that otherwise you would totally miss on the audio input, whether it's music or a lecture or some other information. The sound wave, we have information available on it. You're welcome to write to us and get that information. We'll send it out to you in a booklet form that kind of explains what it's all about, or you can go to our website, which is at the bottom of the screen. The idea behind these technologies for us was the idea that we could advance and deliver technologies to the average person that would be useful. One of the other instruments that we'll be bringing out in the next couple of years, it's in prototypical design now, is one that measures subtle energy fields in and around the body and actually give you the feedback. Again, feedback is an extremely important process in accelerating learning processes. And if you study most of the areas of philosophy and science where they kind of cross over, you'll hear oftentimes people refer to energy centers within the body. Well, these energy centers can be measured, and they start approximately here, and they move up to the top of the head. 7 centers are generally involved, but it's always been subjective again, where, is it really there, or is there really energy there? And there's a column that flows approximately 6 inches out from the body. With the instrument that my colleagues in Germany have developed, you can take the instrument, move it into the area of those energy centers, and actually see a needle move. When you move out of the area of that energy center, the needle stops moving. So feedback, again, important. If you want to activate the heart center or the center in this area of the throat, you can actually see the needle, get the feedback, change your way of thinking, change your way of focusing your attention, and see if you can move the needle at will. That's where the feedback comes in for energy work in a number of fields. This instrument we think will be extraordinarily valuable and one that we look forward to bringing out in the future. The next area I want to talk about deals with sound and agriculture. And this particular book, Secrets of the Soil by Peter Tompkins and Christopher Bird, is a book that we publish, and I consider it to be one of the most important books in alternative agriculture. One section of this book deals with sound and the effect of sound on plants. In fact, it really goes back even further to an earlier book by the same author. It's called The Secret Lives of Plants, which is also a book that we carry. People remember from the 60s and 70s this whole idea of talking to plants and music affecting plant growth, and people would play classical music and get really excellent growth, and they play hard rock or really rough edge music, and plants would end up not being as healthy and not being as prolific in their growth. This particular chapter within Secrets of the Soil that I'm interested in deals with a product and a technology called sonic bloom. And it was developed by a gentleman who actually got the motivation for the technology in Vietnam. He was in Vietnam during the war. He saw lots of starvation, lots of poverty, and really set himself about trying to find a way to increase agricultural production. Intuitively, when he got back to the States, he was observing songbirds, and he drew a connection between songbirds and plant growth. And what he decided was that birds, for some reason, could stimulate plants to grow. And here's what he found: that in the morning, when the dew is settling on the leaves of plants and the birds start chirping right before sunrise, generally speaking, and extending for a little while after sunrise, what would happen is those sound signals generated by songbirds actually causes the pores on the leaves of plants to open. And when they open, the dew that's on the leaves of plants and the dust that settles on those leaves, and what does dust carry? It carries colloidal minerals, very fine particles, mineral substances or pollutants or whatever happens to be in the air that settles on those leaves. The leaves pores open, sucking in the moisture and the particulate material with them, and actually bringing nutrients into the plant in addition to the nutrients brought in through the root system. So what this gentleman discovered was the idea that you could stimulate plants and you could add the right nutrients by spraying them as a foliar spray, spraying them on the leaves of plants, then playing the right sound sequences, not necessarily birds, and actually having them intake more efficiently those materials. But there was more going on there. There was more to it than that. There was actually a physicist in New Jersey who was also a musician working on exactly the same idea. But he was looking at it from a different perspective. He was looking at what happened within the DNA when sound sequences were played, and the mathematics of that. It was what fascinated him. And so what he determined was that you could actually create genetic alterations in the plants, making them more vibrant, and that this was probably the root to what was going on with sound, that Dan Carlson, the inventor of sonic bloom, discovered on the one hand intuitively, the physicist discovered scientifically, both saying the same things. We wrote an article about that in the Flashpoints, and there's also an article on sound and the work of this physicist in other publications that we cite. The point being, huge differences in plant growth were achieved. I went to Dan Carlson's farm in Minnesota, actually right over the border of Minnesota into Wisconsin, and he showed me a number of things. This is an example of some of the things that were going on with accelerated plant growth. In an 8 by 16 foot plot, 8 by 16 feet, 5,000 pounds of tomatoes were grown using this system. Phenomenal. In the same size plot, 8 by 16 feet, 800 cantaloupes were grown. And these aren't small, these were larger than normal. I went to Dan's farm and actually took a look at the nut trees and plants that he was growing there, and these were the observations that I made. Firstly, on an elm tree normally has a leaf that if you looked at the leaf, it's sort of a tapered leaf about the size of 2 fingers. And I looked at a plant, a tree, that was probably 25 or 30 years old, and Dan had bought this farm 13 years before, and you could actually count from the top of the tree down. Another thing about an elm is as they grow, they not only get another ring, each branch cluster of 5 branches, when you look between those clusters, the vertical growth of about 10 inches to a foot represent 1 year of growth. So you can count the clusters down from the top of the tree, 13 years down to when Dan had purchased the farm. And what you would see is, in the 13 years that he had the farm, you didn't get 10 inches or 12 inches of growth. You got 4 feet or more of vertical growth between branch clusters. When you looked at the wood itself, it wasn't pulpy or had a bunch of voids in it. It was just as dense as the other wood. It just had much, much more growth. Now then, when you looked at the seed that came off of that elm tree, and next to that mother plant was the offspring that had grown over about a 7-year period. And instead of the leaves being this big as they were on the mother plant, the offspring's leaves were the size of your hand. That difference was because the plant was genetically altered, so it didn't just affect its ongoing growth, but the offspring became much more potent, much more energetic plants. The other thing, the fruit trees in his orchard didn't have any pesticides whatsoever, but insects attack weak plants, not strong plants. They're part of that process of decaying the plant in order to break it down into soil. So they're nature's workhorses. They go into gardens to kill the dead, basically, and bring them into the formation of soil, whereas vigorous plants, you could see it. The insects would attack the outside of an apple, for instance, but never penetrate the skin. You just see a slight blemish, and off they'd go. The fact is, in hardwoods, instead of 75-year growth or 50-year growth for veneer-grade black walnut, a plantation of over 1,000 trees with 10 years of growth showed triple the density, triple the diameter growth. What is that worth? In black walnut, a 10-inch diameter tree, 10 feet in length, represents, in veneer grade, approximately $10,000 in value. So tripling the speed of a plant like this certainly has economic gains and benefits. Likewise, when putting pesticides into the field, the idea of the foliar activity, the expanding of the pores, actually suck in pesticides so that plants you want to get rid of, you can get rid of with a lot less poison released into the environment. The last thing I want to cover is really getting a little bit away from the ways in which energy can be introduced to the body, as we talked about electroacupuncture, the idea of moderating physical health, and there's lots of things that can be done. This is a product that was developed by my friends again in Germany, and it's a compound that actually changes the energy state of the body. And let me talk a little bit about that. This is First Elements, and it'll be released late in 2005 in the United States. But the idea behind this product was to look at a way to get energy into the body, perhaps chemically. And so here's what we created in Germany. Robert Tiedemann spent almost 4 years looking at developing a way to get negative hydrogen into the body. In other words, basically negative energy, electrons, and you can measure electrons by putting this in solution. You can actually take a measurement that will show approximately 700 negative electron volts. What we're talking about there in terms of energy is releasing free electrons in the body, and what happens with that is very simple. Toxins within the body tend to be positively charged, so negatively charged particles lock onto those and neutralize them, or take neutral particles, donate a free electron, which makes them scavengers, and they act as scavengers within the body, taking those toxins into a position where they can be eliminated through the normal methods that the body eliminates toxic waste. The other thing that happens is when you're detoxifying, in most cases, if you go through regimes that detoxify the body, you get really sluggish. You might even feel a little bit ill and weak for that first few days. With this material, that does not occur because it actually adds energy into the system that not only detoxifies you, but leaves you a net level of energy that actually increases your sense of alertness and focus without the edge of, say, caffeine, but the same alertness and focus. The other thing that happens is with this, if you take a half a gram a day, 500 milligrams a day in the morning and 500 milligrams a day in the afternoon, and you measure your pH, your acidic alkaline balance. In most of our diets in the West, we take in way too much acidic food, and you see it in hair loss, you see it in complexions, you see it in stomach disorders, and in generally bad health. Highly acidic systems are not the best for human beings. You want to be slightly on the alkaline side. When I started taking this product within 5 days and taking a pH strip, which you can get at any drugstore or any pharmaceutical supply house, you can take and measure your pH level and look at it on a strip. So you can do it with saliva in the mouth or urine or blood, and you can look at your pH balance and see. And mine started out highly acidic at the beginning of this 5-day period. I made no appreciable change in diet. Each day, in the morning and in the afternoon, took a pH test, and by the end of 5 days, my overall system was slightly on the alkaline side. My energetic state was much better. The acid feelings in my stomach were gone, and it was very, very quick. The idea behind adding energy in is the root behind this science, and it's something that we think as a nutritional supplement will offer great advantages for folks in increasing their general energy state and sense of well-being. The idea behind diet as it connects to our health is extremely important. And we all know the things that we're told about what to eat and what not to eat, but oftentimes we don't balance our system. So it's the idea of supplements in a busy and hectic world that offers other alternatives to getting those nutrients into the body and increasing the energy state of the body so that we can do better, perform better, and function in the 21st century. What we've covered today are a lot of areas, and we've touched on a lot of areas, and I draw your attention back to our earlier publications, back to our website for more information. The referenced material is substantial. We're going to include some of that on the DVD, but for the sake of space and time, not everything can always be included. Get interested in these issues because they do matter. It's your health, it's our futures, and more importantly, it's the technology of the 21st century that don't drive us. It's we that drive them. Let's make sure those technologies are used in our interest and not against us. Let's look for the future that makes us healthier, smarter, and more capable in a complex world. For more information on the products and things that we've discussed today, you can contact Earth Pulse Press. Our address is on the screen, our website is on the screen, and we would appreciate hearing from you. We can also send you a catalog free of charge anywhere in the world and keep you informed on our issues. Go to earthpulse.com and sign up for our flash list. That'll keep you on top of the latest information as we collect that information and make it available to the public.